What's going on, ladies, gents, and kids of all ages? It is Eric coming back at you once again from the Nerd Cave, and today we have another very exciting deck tech video for you. We're going to be talking about a deck that could be the best deck in the meta right now, Sapphire Steel, playing a lot of really interesting tech options. I think this deck is a lot of fun. Before we get into the list, a big thank you to the Patreons for making giveaways on the channel possible. But without any further ado, let's go ahead and talk about today's deck list, Sapphire Steel. So the first card in the 1-drop slot is going to be 4 Mickey Mouse Food Fight Defender, a 1-cost inkable character, 1/2 stat line with resist 1. Almost makes him kind of like a 1/3, but better. A 1/3 is still going to be a little bit easier to deal with than something with resist. It could potentially be pinged away by things with 1 attack, whereas something with resist 1 is just going to take no damage in that situation. That is the only character in the 1-drop slot. Jumping over to our 1-cost actions, we are on 3 Fire the Cannons, 1-cost uninkable action, dealing 2 damage to any chosen character. Great way to clear off those early game board threats. Super good in the Steel Song matchup, as is that Mickey Mouse. Next up, and you may have seen this coming with being on Sapphire Steel, we are on 4 Fortisphere, or as some people call it, Steel Sickle. It's exactly like Popsicle, but Steel is a 1-cost inkable item, and when it enters play, you're going to draw a card. Does have a different ability than Popsicle, and it is kind of an interesting ability. You can pay 1 and banish it, and chosen character gets Bodyguard until the start of your next turn. So a great way to potentially defend that board. Mainly, you're just looking to draw cards with it, though. Next up, speaking of Popsicles, we are on 4 Popsicles, a 1-cost inkable item. When you play this item, you may draw a card, and that's Redwood. Banish this item, remove up to 2 damage from chosen characters. So a great way to heal some characters in the deck that are going to benefit from it. But again, mainly you're looking to just use this to draw cards, specifically with Hiram. Next up, jumping over to the 2-drop slot and talking about some characters again, we are on 4 Jim Hawkins Stubborn Cabin Boy, 2-cost inkable character, 0/4 stat line, questing for 1, so a little bit of a meager quest. But during your turn, whenever a card is put into your ink wall, this character is going to gain Challenger +2. It is worth noting he is a potential shift target. If you are doing the shift line with Jim Hawkins, that Challenger +2 is a state that is going to carry over to the shifted Jim Hawkins. So if you give Challenger +2 to him and then you shift him, your bigger Jim Hawkins is potentially a 7/5 character, a 5/5 with Challenger 2, but attacking for 7. Next up in the 2-drop slot, we are on 2 Doc, a 2-cost uninkable character, 1/3 stat line, questing for 1. You know him, you love him. This is a card that's really been going up in price recently. I noticed that foils are hitting $14, which is crazy for a rare, particularly a rare from last set. And he does have the ability Drastic Measures, which I've been hot on since it came out. When you play this character, you may discard your hand to draw 2 cards. So not only is it a May ability, but it is a fantastic ability if you have no cards in your hand, just to go ahead and refuel your hand. So when you get down to 0 cards, throw this guy down, discard nothing, and draw 2 cards while developing a 1/3 character who can at least quest for 1. Next up in the 2-cost slot, we are on 2 Calhoun, fantastic Wreck-It Ralph character played by Jane Lynch, if you haven't seen the movie. 2-cost unequal character, 3/2 stat line, questing for 1, resist +1. And so again, it is going to prevent it from dying to a lot of that Steel Song stuff. And during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you're going to go ahead and gain 2 lore. So the same ability we've seen on Robin Hood that has been very effective in the meta, and worth noting, the same attack as the big shifted Robin Hood, but coming down on a 2-cost uninkable. We would probably be playing more of those if it weren't for the fact that she's uninkable. Next up, we are on 4 Mr. Smee, Bumbling Mate, a 2-cost inkable character, 3/3 stat line, questing for 2. I think I've talked about this character about a million times. I still think it is easily one of the best cards in the game. 3/3 for 2 is always good. Questing for 2 is crazy, and its ability isn't that much of a drawback. At the end of your turn, if this character is exerted and you don't have a captain character in play, he is going to deal 1 damage to himself. You could potentially heal that with a Popsicle when it's relevant to you, but a lot of times you're just going to let him quest a couple times or banish something before he goes out, and he's going to get his value for you. Last character in the 2-cost slot, we're on 2 Noi Orphan Thief, a 2-cost inkable character, 1/2 stat line, questing for 2. This is a surprisingly good way to potentially close out games. Not necessarily always something you're looking to play on 2, although it can be great on 2 as well, because while you have an item in play, this character is going to gain resist +1 and ward, which is fantastic because it's going to prevent it from being dealt with, other than something maybe like Lady Tremaine, which has gained a little bit of more favor in the meta with more people playing characters with ward, or Be Prepared, something that's going to be a sweeping board wipe. Even Grab Your Swords doesn't deal with it when it does have that resist +1. Jumping over to some 2-cost actions, we are on 4 Sail the Azurite Sea, a 2-cost inkable action card. This turn, you may put an additional card from your hand into your inkwell face down, and then draw a card. I think this is great, giving you that card draw right away, and then potentially letting you ink whatever you draw, or ink something else from your hand if what you draw is not better than what you're already already holding. It is worth noting it is for the entire remainder of your turn, so you don't have to ink right away. You can ink after you've drawn, or any time during your turn after you play this card. Does have to be an inkable. It's not like Fishbone Quill, so keep that in mind. Last up in the 2-cost slot, we are on 1 2-cost item, a 2-cost inkable Imperial Bow. Pay 1 and exert it. Chosen hero character gains challenger +2 and evasive this turn. They get +2 while challenging, which is going to be relevant to some of the characters in this deck. We definitely do have some heroes in here. As far as your early game characters are concerned, Calhoun, Jim Hawkins, and Mickey can all potentially benefit from this card. Giving it evasive this turn is always great to deal with an evasive threat, and challenger +2 is always good, and it's potential fodder for your Hiram to get you some additional card draw. And if it's not necessary in the current matchup, or it's not necessary with the way that your board is looking, ink it. It's the best thing about inkables. Jumping over to the 3-cost slot, we are on 3 Pete, a 3-cost inkable character, 3/3 stat line, Pete Games referee. He is questing for 1 and has the ability Blow the Whistle. When you play this character, opponents can't play actions until the start of your next turn, so it's going to shut off those Be Prepared, those Whole New Worlds, anything you don't want your opponent to be playing until it comes around to your turn again. Those Grab Your Swords potentially, really any of those other actions, and it's not just shutting off the ability to sing, it is shutting off your opponent from even hard casting actions for an entire rotation, which is fantastic into things like Steel Song or in those matchups where your opponent may be playing Be Prepared. Last 3-cost character in the deck is going to be 2 Alice Savvy Sailor, a 3-cost uninkable 1/4 stat line questing for 2. She is also a hero, potentially going to be able to benefit from that Imperial Bow. And she does have Ward, which is great because that is going to keep her in play. Again, a great way to potentially close out games. And when she quests, another chosen character of yours can get +1 more and gain Ward until the start of your next turn. If you don't particularly need the lore, it is kind of a cool way to play this. Give something the Ward that you just played, so it's going to prevent it from being banished until the next turn, and then you're going to be able to take advantage of whatever it is that character is potentially going to do. Really good with something like Tinkerbell or even with the big Jim Hawkins. And she quests for 2, which is great. Last up in the 3-cost slot, we're on 4 Fishbone Quill. You know it, you love it. You gotta have it in Sapphire. It is in pretty much every Sapphire deck with a couple exceptions. Sapphire Amber doesn't play it, but it is a 3-cost inkable item, and it has exert this item, put any card from your hand into your inkwell face down. So it is going to let you target any card. It does not have to be inkable. That's the great thing about Fishbone Quill. It will let you ink some of those uninkables and just continue to ramp up your ink and get way ahead of your opponent and play big devastating threats before they can do anything about it. Next up in the 4-cost slot, we're on 3 Pluto Guard Dog, a 4-cost inkable 1/5 character with bodyguard questing for 1. But what's really cool about this character is while this character has no damage, he gets +4 strength, so he is going to be a 5/5 until he takes damage onto him. Not as good in that Steel Song matchup. Like I mentioned, a lot of the cards are kind of tech towards Steel Song. Pluto is not one of them. But if you are going against something where your opponent is going to be in a position where they don't have cards where they can deal damage, so you're not playing against Steel primarily, but you're playing against something like Ruby, Ruby's going to have a really hard time dealing with this without challenging into it. Obviously Maui trades with it, but getting a 4-cost to trade with a 6/5 always feels good. Being able to protect your other characters is excellent. Maybe you have something like Hiram down and your opponent may want to take advantage of getting that off the field with Maui. All of a sudden you put a Pluto down and now they have to trade with Pluto. Pluto Guard Dog, definitely a great card in the new set. Then you heard me talk about this card previously in the 4-cost slot. You gotta have it. Is 4 Hiram Flaversham, a 4-cost inkable character, 1/6 stat line questing for 1. And when you play this character and whenever he quests, you may banish one of your items to draw 2 cards. So the fact that he doesn't when he comes into play means you're always going to be getting that value out of him. And if he sticks around for a turn rotation to be able to quest, you're just going to be getting even more value out of him. He is your primary card draw engine in this deck, although you do have a couple backups. But Hiram is definitely a card you want to see. So even if you get him in that starting hand, he's not necessarily something you want to mulligan. Then jumping over to the 5-cost slot and some of the last few cards in the deck, we are on 4 Jim Hawkins Rigging Specialists. I've seen people play less of these. I think you really want to be able to ensure that shift line early in the game. I think he's really super good to be able to shift 3 with a 5/5 that's questing for 2, and when he comes into play you're going to be able to deal 1 damage to something and potentially clean it up with something like Fire the Cannons. I think Jim Hawkins is definitely something that's getting a little overlooked. The fact that he was an uncommon and not a rare or even a super rare is kind of crazy to me. I think Jim Hawkins Rigging Specialist is Very, very good. And one of the only 5-cost cards in the deck. The other 5-cost card, and another card that is potentially really good with that Jim Hawkins if you're able to throw your hand down really quick and early in the game, is A Whole New World, an uninkable 5-cost action song. So you're going to be able to sing it with Jim Hawkins and the next character that we're going to talk about. And each player discards their hand and draws 7 cards. So again, if you're able to just get rid of all those resources early, you haven't drawn into something like a Hiram and you need to reset your hand, A Whole New World can be a great way to do that. Or if your opponent is outdrawing you big time, or you're playing against something like discard and they've managed to make you discard down a bit, A Whole New World is a great way to get advantage back in that discard matchup. And then the last character we are on, 3 Tinkerbell, a 6-cost inkable 4/5 stat line, questing for 2, shifting for 4. Not relevant in this deck because we don't have a shift target for it. But when you play this character, she is going to deal 1 damage to each opposing character, and during your turn, whenever this character banishes another character in a challenge, you may deal 2 damage to chosen opposing character. Obviously you can't target things with ward, but you'll be able to target all those other characters, even ones that are ready. So it's a great way to continue to keep the field clear and keep that pressure on in the late game. Can also sing those Whole New Worlds if that's what you need to do with it. But that is the breakdown on Sapphire Steel. I think it's in a really cool place in the current meta. I think it's maybe even overtaken Sapphire Ruby as the dominant option. Being able to have essentially 8 popsicles makes the deck a lot more consistent. You really need to make sure you draw into that Hiram if you can, but you do have some backup options, and it is a lot more aggro than Ruby Sapphire, so you can kind of go hard in the paint with the aggro early in the game if you need to. What are your thoughts on it? Do you think that is the best way to play Sapphire Steel? Are there cards that you would play that I didn't? Are there cards that you saw on the list that you maybe didn't think of and think you may add to your own Sapphire Steel list? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Remember to like, comment, and subscribe, and when you see those toys, video games, and Sapphire Steel lists featuring the awesome hero Jim Hawkins off in the distance, remember, it is not a mirage. You guys have a great day.